afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Families Aging with Mental Health and Substance Use. I'm Gail Cormier, the Project Director of NASPAC. Before we begin our presentation, we wanted to tell you a bit about both our SAMHSA-funded Centers of Excellences. We're teaming together today to present this event. The National Family Support Technical Assistance Center, NASTAC, is the nation's first SAMHSA-funded Center of Excellence for families. They are focused on families and caregivers of children, regardless of age, who experience serious mental illness and/or substance use challenges. Next slide. NASTAC provides trainings for families and the workforce that supports them. I encourage you to visit our website. To request technical assistance, all you have to do is click on the green TA button on the top of the right-hand corner of the website page. Also, feel free to sign up for our newsletter to get all the information on our upcoming trainings and webinars. Next slide. I would like to bring to attention our monthly Family Connection and office hour events. Starting on January 6th, families will have a safe place to share ideas, learn, and network. Also beginning in February, we invite family leaders to join us in office hours to do the same. Next slide. And I am very fortunate to have the experienced team that is here to help us present and help me today. Michelle Wade-Friedman and Kelsey Engelbrecht will be assisting on the webinar. I also want to thank Dr. Linda Gargan, our principal investigator, and SAMHSA for making this co-event possible. And now I will turn it over to Erin.
Hello all, and welcome. Very excited to have you here. As Gail mentioned, this is our first collaborative event together with our two centers. I'm Erin Emery-Tiburcio, and I co-direct the E4 Center for Excellence in Aging. Our mission is to engage, empower, and educate healthcare providers, very broadly defined, and community-based organizations for equity in behavioral health for older adults and their families across the U.S. We are focused on three key areas of depression, suicide, substance use disorders, and serious mental illness, and where they overlap to create or exacerbate physical health disorders. So for some, this is layered on top of low socioeconomic status and minority status that creates the most vulnerable population of older adults. So on the next slide, to address these needs, E4 is focused, and actually we're one more slide, E4 is focused on building knowledge, skills, and attitudes in the mental health workforce, again, very broadly defined, working with health systems and the aging network to build partnerships to prevent older adults from falling through the cracks, providing training and technical assistance on evidence-based programs for older adult mental health and substance use. And although we don't train older adults and families directly with E4, we do provide resources to equip the mental health workforce nationally to share. And part of that work is evident in some of our upcoming events. On the next slide, we are very excited to host Dr. Martha Crother from the University of Alabama, who will be talking about her area of expertise in mental health needs of rural older African Americans. She's a fantastic speaker. Please join us for that. We're also excited to be having a joint event with one of the other centers of excellence in behavioral health disparities with older LGBTQ adults. And then in the spring, you may have all seen the SAMHSA-funded psychosocial programs for adults, older adults with serious mental illness. And in the spring, we'll be doing an entire series focusing on each of those programs. So Dr. Steve Bartels, one of our E4 Center leadership team, will be talking about an overview of that report and the programs that are incorporated into it. And then the folks who created those programs will be coming and presenting on each of those programs. So if any of you are interested in getting technical assistance on implementation of those, we will have that to offer as well. So please don't hesitate to join us. And in the chat is a link to the E4 Center website with our calendar of events coming up. Thank you so much, Laura. So on the next slide, as we get started, a couple of housekeeping elements to remind you. All participants during the entire presentation will be muted, and at least during the presentation, we ask that you keep your cameras off as it helps with bandwidth, certainly. We will strongly encourage you, however, to Enter your comments and questions into the chat box. We have a team of folks who are going to be monitoring the chat and taking questions so that when we move into the breakout rooms, we can make sure that every one of your questions gets answered. So as the thought or the question comes to mind, pop it into the chat. We will make sure that we are monitoring that chat. And as we move into breakout rooms, then later, just as a quick preparation for that, and we'll repeat this information, we'll be moving into 2 breakout groups after both of the presentations. One that will be for the professional workforce and the other for family. You can make whatever choice about whatever breakout room you would like to attend and can make that choice about what feels right for you today, as many of you may actually straddle both of those roles. Also, a reminder that the information presented today will be sent out via email following this presentation. So every participant will get a PDF of the slides and a link to the recording in case you missed any parts of it or want to go back and listen, or you loved the presentation so much that you want to share it with all of your friends and colleagues. So you will get a PDF of the slides, a link to the recording, and those of you who are interested in continuing education, we'll have a link to the CE at the end of the presentation and in the follow-up email, just in case you miss it during the presentation. So without further ado, I have the great honor of introducing our speakers. Dr. Sarah Hahn-Qualls is the Kramer Family Professor of Aging Studies and Professor of Psychology at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs and Director of the Gerontology Center. She's recognized nationally and internationally for her leadership in developing the field of clinical geropsychology, for which she has received multiple awards. She's published widely on mental health and aging, caregiver interventions, and geropsychology, including several books such as Caregiver Family Therapy and Aging and Mental Health. At the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, she co-founded the training clinic and doctoral program in clinical psychology that focuses on geropsychology. She's built interdisciplinary innovation centers to foster research and education in senior housing and outpatient health and wellness facilities. She enjoys translating research and best practice concepts to a broad set of audiences, including community members, direct care staff, administrators, and planners, as well as professional and policy leaders. We are also very honored to have Dr. Sue Smith, who is well-known and respected in Georgia and at the national level for her expertise in children's services, advocacy, education, and systems of care. She is a founding member of the Georgia Parent Support Network, Georgia's Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Sue has consulted with the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, Macro International, and Georgetown University. She's also worked with numerous states as well as regions in Georgia on topics related to children with severe emotional disturbances and the delivery of services to these children and their families. Sue earned a Doctor of Education degree, Master of Science degree in Public Health Administration, and completed the University of Health for Systems of Care Children's Mental Health Graduate Certificate Program. She's the recipient of the prestigious Rosalind Carter Caregiver Award. Those of you who aren't familiar with that, that is a big deal. Tipper Gore Remember the Children Award, Carl Dennis Unconditional Care Award, and Voices for Georgia's Children Award. Sue is the mother of 1 adopted and 1 foster daughter with severe emotional disturbances. Again, we are so honored to have both Dr. Qualls and Dr. Smith with us today. And without further ado, I will pass off to Dr. Qualls. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's delightful to be here. What an impressive gathering of people from obviously all over the country, and it's so interesting. I can't wait for the discussion section because that's going to be probably the most interesting and important. If you can advance the slide, please. So today, what I'm going to talk about in my brief time with you is about the family's experience. A little bit, and I'm going to take a lifespan perspective on that because I want to talk really about how I want to invite you to think about how your approach to this work might be different if you really took a life course perspective and a systems perspective to thinking about what the family experience is and what the interface is going to be with care providers. So please advance. So let's start with some key findings from research on families' experience. I've listed 5 things here. I want to say from the beginning that this area of research is desperately in need of considerable work. It's a very thin literature, and I hope that we will engage many students of the future in wanting to build a career in this area, because we actually know remarkably little about what families need and how to support them from a research perspective. I think we know a lot from a services perspective. So let me just start with these 5 things. First, there's one of the things we know is that families talk about feeling confused about the problem, how to think about it, what its source is, what its nature is, and how to get answers for how to think about it. We'll talk a little more about that. Families certainly have a wide range of feeling level responses in their experience, and those include just simple worry for the person living with the mental illness or substance use disorder. Often there's a sense of guilt that they haven't handled moments in the family's life well. They may feel guilt about the cause of the disorder, but even more than that, just simply handling these very difficult interactions that they've been having often engenders guilt and resentment at the person with the disorder and or other family members or the community or the service network. And then the sense of grief that they've lost something in their expectations. It's not what they had expected. Not surprisingly, they feel burdened, and often they feel blamed by providers. There's a sense in which they often get the message from providers that if only they were doing something different, the dysregulation wouldn't be as great or the problem wouldn't be as great. And we know they have smaller social networks. So somehow the community around them is not surrounding them in the way that it surrounds other families of adults. Next, please. I'm going to use an amalgamated case. This is a fictional case that just illustrates a typical story that I've encountered, at least in clinical practice or personal life. I'm going to call it Bobby, him, Bobby, and Bobby's family is made up of parents, John and Jenny, who married in the early 70s. Bobby's now 50 and his mother is 70. And he has 2 siblings, Ashley and Travis, who are younger than him. Next. So if we think about where they are today, we encounter them in our friendship circle or a service network system, but they have a long history. This is a family that started a long time ago. So let's just target Jenny's birth in 1950. She's 70. She grew up, she and her husband married. They had a whole set of dreams and expectations. And then Bobby was born in 1975, and then 2 other children were born, and they reared those children. And in the case of early adult onset mental illness, for many of them, they had a relatively normal child rearing period with no hint of what was to come. Next. Then there is the transition. And often in serious mental illness, that's in the early 20s, not always. Often in substance use disorder, that's in young adulthood, not always. But in Bobby's case, around age 20, he was living in a college dorm, going to school, and he started using marijuana more heavily than he ever had and heavier than other people around him. He also began to be self-isolating, and his grades dropped. And at some point, there was a rapid deterioration into a mental health crisis that led to a hospitalization, all facilitated at the university. And in Bobby's case, he had not given permission for his parents to have access to his health records. So the university had to handle a lot and was not allowed to inform his family. And his family essentially doesn't have contact and is worried and is scared. And there is that whole chaos period of that first big interruption. At the hospitalization, as often happens, ended with Bobby being discharged home to his parents. He left the university and he begins a series of enrollments in the local community college. He's angry in his young 20s. He is somewhat engaged in the healthcare system, but not regularly. He does not want to take medications. and he wants to rely on marijuana and alcohol, and does. He keeps starting community college, but doesn't make it through the semester. Sometimes he works part-time, doesn't keep that job very long. And as you can well imagine, this is not just an isolated case of Bobby's distress, but the whole system is distressed. So his siblings, of course, no longer is home the same place it was before Bobby moved back home with his struggles. And so the siblings are distressed and they begin to distance. They hang out more with friends. Friends don't come to their house. They distance from parents. Parents are tied up in Bobby's, interacting with Bobby and care systems. And as happens in many cases, Bobby's parents, John and Jenny, divorced. They could not quite make it through this. And Bobby is hospitalized again and again and again. Next. One qualitative study done by Raymond Willis and Sullivan Boyer gives us some really nice hints about how families talk about this process. They talk about, in the upper left-hand quadrant here, recognizing there's a problem. And in that period, they see changes in behavior. They know it's serious, but they can't figure out if it's abnormal or normal adolescence or normal difficulties that some kids have and get past. So that struggle often delays their decision to act. And when they decide to act, they often also face barriers in acting that have to do with HIPAA laws and FERPA laws and fears of intruding upon their adult child's privacy, and yet a sense of responsibility. And often they scramble for a diagnosis in that upper right-hand corner. That the diagnostic process is rarely smooth and simple. And by the time a diagnosis comes, then it's a relief and a shock, because now they have to get their head around the fact that this exists. My child is not just a heavy user, my child actually has a disorder of some substance, or my child has a mental illness. And while it's an adult, we parents who are in our 60s and 70s still are very aware of the familial relationship of parent-child. This is our child and our adult child. So then there is, once the diagnosis happens, then there is the scramble to figure out how to live normal life. And the family's often in some level of turmoil. They're trying to figure out how to access services, who's going to pay, what insurance will pay, what happens, what's going to happen when my child goes off my insurance, if I have it. If I don't have it, how do I get my child into any service system? And if the family's lucky and they create a relatively stable service structure, then another theme emerges, which is really learning to endure with the illness, really rethinking family life. What does it mean to have a holiday together or not together? What does it mean that adult children have moved far away to kind of avoid this constant turmoil? Or what does it mean to integrate and find meaningful roles and celebrate the contributions of the person with serious mental illness? So expectations and goals get redefined, and often there is sort of a vague fear for the future. How often will we have these interruptions? What will they look like? How will it change other aspects of the life course ahead? Next. So if we go back to that life course image, it kind of lays out for us now an opportunity to think about all the different pieces of family life that intersect. So if you look at the top, you see John and Jenny's marriage is characterized by separation and then divorce, and then John breaking contact with Bobby and Jenny. Not an uncommon pattern. And at the same time those things are happening, you can see right above the dates on this timeline are the blue arrows illustrating hospitalizations that Bobby experiences. And then there are residential issues that are part of that hospitalization discharge planning process. So the green arrows illustrate the periods in which Bobby returns to live with Jenny, and the gray arrows underneath the dates, the periods where Bobby is homeless. So Bobby's adulthood, if you just look at those arrows, is characterized by so much change. Next. So if we go back to just remembering that this is part of a larger family structure, which our care systems often don't remember or accommodate, in fact, there's a lot happening in this family. So Ashley marries, Travis marries, there are grandchildren born. And there are relationships that are formed among all of these people. Those children come to know Bobby as Uncle Bobby in some way, a mystery, a scary person, a loved uncle. And Jenny is relating to grandchildren through processes of separation, divorce, and her own engagement with Bobby and Bobby's care, etc. Next. So to go back then to that life course perspective, we now add below Bobby's gold lines the awareness that these dates in which Travis is married and Ashley's married and the birth of those grandchildren and nieces also are part of the life course events this family's experienced. Next. And so if we look here at the circle, the ovals that really then illustrate or emphasize the overlap in all of these life course events of this family, it's not just Bobby and Bobby's care. This is a family living through the life course of a family, and mental illness is a piece of it, or substance use is a piece of it. And in Bobby's case, both. Next. So if we go back and sort of think of it from the lens of what is it that families do for adults with mental illness and substance use as they move into, across adulthood and into the aging period, some research by Cummings and Croft gives us a sense of what the key roles are. And so one of those roles is support for self-care. I should have disclosed at the beginning, I have 2 children with mental illness in adulthood, one more high functioning in many ways, but pretty significant interruption events, and one with intellectual disability and serious mental illness as well. So I know when that says support for self-care, I personally know what that has looked like in my life, which is that self-care means, is the apartment clean enough to be hygienic? Is this person engaging in transportation that's safe? Is this person engaging in substance use at a rate that is going to be self-harming, and nutrition that is self-harming? So that little term self-care is so huge for families. And what the families are doing on a daily basis is often truly invisible to the care systems. Financial management is often a piece of what families are doing, either formally through some sort of conservatorship or more often informally, by handling, by trying to help keep the person safe so that all money is not spent at the beginning of the month or is not left in unsafe situations where there will be no food at the end of the month, or the family is providing financial resources of their own because the adult with mental illness has burned through the cash for the month, assuming they have some. The family is also handling a lot of psychiatric distress management. In my family and in many I know, mom's the first person that gets called when the person begins to dysregulate. And so that distress management is a significant skill set and emotional role that families often play. Next. Next slide, please. Formal providers play significant roles during this period. And of course, in many families, keeping an adult linked with formal providers is one of the ongoing challenges. The formal providers have actual responsibility for treatment of this psychiatric distress, whatever that is, and integrating that hopefully with the physical health care. The formal providers are providing information to the family or to the individual with the disorder. And when the psychiatric distress or the emotion regulation or the symptom regulation falls down and the person and dangerous behaviors bubble up, it's the formal system that has to step in, whether it's adult protection or it's a psychiatric hospitalization and hold. Next, please. So one of the findings from Cummings and Croft that I find particularly poignant is the finding that formal services are not always, as we well know, equally engaged by families or by individuals living with mental illness or substance use disorder. In fact, formal services are more likely if the person is not living with the family, if they're living in a group residence, if their behavior is dangerous, if they have physical illness, if they are clearly medicated, and if they need support for daily activities, typically bathing, dressing, feeding, that kind of level. So if you take the inverse side of each of those bullets, family services are more likely to be the sole responsibility if the person's living in the community, not in a group residence. And if they're not engaging in dangerous behavior, just difficult. If they don't have a glaring physical illness, major medication management, either they won't take it or they don't need it. And if they're able to do their basic ADL activities of daily living, but they still have difficulty, that almost all falls to the family without the benefit of formal services. Next slide. So coming back now and honing in on the aging experience of Jenny. Jenny's 70. She's what we call in the field of geropsychology or gerontology, the young old. She's probably still pretty healthy, but like most of us, she's beginning to gather chronic illnesses. So look at how this overlap occurs. The onset of diabetes occurs for Jenny in around 2000, not long after Bobby's third hospitalization and just before her divorce, after her separation. She has a heart attack in 2010. She has a mini stroke in 2019. So Jenny's health is beginning to accumulate challenges that foreshadow the kinds of things that will be with her through her own aging experience. And thus it foreshadows what the whole family will be dealing with through her aging experience. Ashley and Travis and their families, Bobby, all of them will be dealing with Jenny's health in addition to all the other family experiences, high school band, Girl Scouts, whatever it is, sports that the grandchildren are experiencing, and Bobby's mental health and substance use needs. Next. So as we think about planning for the future, what do we need to hone in on in the family? And I can't wait for the discussion section because you all will have excellent ideas and questions and experiences to add. But here are some things I just want to highlight that I take away from this literature and from my clinical experience. Family planning for the future has to include an understanding and appreciation for the role that parental health decline and death will play in creating structural family changes and in precipitating changes in housing and care structures for the person living with mental illness or substance use disorder. As a parent's health declines or when the parent dies, there are significant role shifts in the family, whether those happen in a sudden, sharp moment when a parent dies and all of a sudden siblings discover they have this other set of roles they're going to now take on, or whether it occurs slowly over time. Role shifts are huge. Grief, and often there's some level of resentment either to the parent or to the adult with mental illness or to other siblings for not doing enough. Communication challenges, practical issues. How are we going to do holidays? And then there are very significant issues. If the parent has been playing a role in stability maintenance that's typical, then who's going to play that? And how are we going to keep crises, interruptions in housing, et cetera, from happening? The siblings of the person with mental illness or substance abuse typically say they want to step up and play a role, but they want their role to focus around emotional support more than the instrumental that their parents are doing. And in some research that my lab has done, we've found that sometimes the siblings are hesitant to talk to the parent, the aging parent, because they're kind of afraid to say, yes, I'll care for him, but not the way you're doing it. If there's a history of conflict in the family or abuse in the family, that makes everything more complicated. And certainly the engagement in their own families is a critical consideration for siblings of persons living with mental illness and substance use. And their awareness that they also need to be monitoring the care of the older generation. Next. So some key points for formal services. There are a bunch of them out there that exist. They're not always easy to access. People sometimes have trouble with eligibility and sit on wait lists a long time. But they exist, and it's a foreign field when families first enter it. And if piece by piece, the family can begin to partner with formal services, those can be incredibly critical to the transition that's going to happen as this family faces the aging of the parent generation. Next. So in thinking about some of the things that we need to help prepare families for, it would include helping the parents form legal and financial plans, and then having conversations about succession transitions with informal and formal supports. Education of the siblings about the care systems and how those are funded, and then some education about communication skills and equipping the siblings to be effective in interacting with the adult living with mental illness or substance use. In the best of all worlds, engagement of a case manager who can help navigate and help the family, help facilitate the family through some of those transitions, and then preparing the adult living with mental illness or substance use with education about how life might be after the parent is gone, some grief they may experience, communication and relationship building skills with the siblings and other people. Now, this is obviously a very high level overview, and there are many on this call that will join in our discussion group to talk about where this works or other ideas, and I look forward to that very much. So I'm going to hand it over now to Sue to talk from her perspective.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Boy, it's a lot to think about there. Sarah, you sparked a lot of different things in my mind, and things I wish I knew more about today, and certainly along the journey that we've had in our family. A little bit about me. Next slide. Okay. My grandmother has a lot to do with this story, and my mother, and incredible life events. For those of you who don't know, I'm kind of old, and it certainly has been a journey. The journey started with, although it probably started way back, and I had no idea what mental illness was at that point. I was born in South Georgia, and people were basically, if they had mental illness, locked up in their homes with somebody to take care of them, to whatever extent the family knew to take care of them. And I didn't grow up knowing anything about mental illness, except you would know you would get locked up in your family home. And then I learned about the institution in our state, Milledgeville, which is quite famous, or infamous, one of the two. And as I grew older, and so we went along a little bit, and you know, eventually moved to Atlanta, like everybody did that was trying to actually make a living back then. We lived on a farm, as I said. And so let me tell you the beginning of this, because I think it's relevant to what happened in the next point. We have moved fast forward. We had 2 teenage daughters. Well, we stop at a Waffle House one morning on the way to the hardware store, and there's this waitress, and the waitress says, you know, you guys look like a nice family. And she's talking to us, and then later my husband tells me, you know, a couple of weeks later, that she's thrown a ticket at a customer, and he's begun to call her the pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. So we got to know this lady a little bit. So we're at the Waffle House, and this little kid comes from a car, and knocks on the door, gets into the Waffle House, and says, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, I gotta eat right now." She says, "Go back and get in the car, we'll eat." Then it was the bathroom. Every 2 minutes, this kid is, you know, at the door of the Waffle House. And what we found was that she was homeless. She lived in the car with her mom, who was the waitress that we had been talking to. And my teenage children took her home with us. And we brought her back when the shift was over, and eventually she stayed with us. And eventually I adopted her. My family adopted the little girl and basically her mother. Her mother became one of my best friends in my whole life. So that was my introduction to mental illness. I had no idea that she was going to change the lives of everybody in our family profoundly. Everybody has worked in this field after a few years of knowing Danny. I got my doctor's degree. I was a high school throwout, not a dropout, a throwout. I didn't want to go, they threw me out because it had been kind of, you know, so different. My life was a different kind of life. And, excuse me, and so Danny came to live with us, and she wasn't in anybody's book. She didn't know about anybody. She didn't know, basically anything. She didn't know her color. She didn't know how to eat. And she started having these raging fits. She was 3 years old. And they continued, and we entered the world of mental health. That's on the other end of what we're talking about today. She's now in her 40s, has her college degree, had major cancer, and 2 weeks ago had a stroke, but she's okay. But in the meantime, every member of our family in some way, shape, or form started working with and for people who have mental illness. So it's been a long journey for me and my family. Most of you know, if you know me, that my husband died 4 years ago. He was a huge advocate specifically for children, and took us a long way on our journey. What my grandmother has to do with this story, that's how we arrived here.
Front door.
Excuse me. That's how we arrived here, but my grandmother, I got distracted by the door. My grandmother has a lot to do with this story because she had 13 children, and I was raised on the family farm with her. And she never turned a soul away, and she was considered a healer in the community. And from her I learned that not all things in life are a natural process if we let it be. We go, we come, we learn. There was always someone at our door wanting help or food or prayer or something. So from my grandmother, I learned what keeps me going today. It's all right. It's going to be okay. And people are different for a reason, and they were all sent here to teach us lessons and to help us along our life's journey. And then there was my mother. My mother, I didn't really know very well. She had brain cancer, they tell me, from the time she died, from the time I was born to the time that she died, a couple of days after my 16th birthday. And the incredible life events are many, but the highlights were finding Danny in the Waffle House. The events were the processes we've gone through to understand what and how the services Sarah talked about and the thoughts that Sarah talked about are in each and every one of our lives, and how we actually live through that. It's a long process, as you know. I will say that a flashback of many years ago, in the height of Danny's illness and other incredibly dramatic events in my family, I considered not doing this anymore, not living. And I certainly am glad that I found people who understood what I needed and helped me. A few steps along the way, Danny's getting older, and we've had every service that was to offer in the state of Georgia. I became a very loud and insistent voice for her care. That was all I ever set out to do, was to be sure that people hear the services. And what I learned was that it's what you learn from what happens to you. A lot has happened in our lives, and a lot continues to happen in our lives. I want to talk a minute about more about the things that came along with Danny. Next slide. Almost from day one, you know it was going to take a village, but not a village, but an entire town and maybe even a city. And what I've found through my journey from my peers, which all happened by accident, I'm the most unlikely person in the world to be doing this, is that it takes connections, support, friends for every stage of your life. And for whoever put that it takes a village, I'm going for state and nation. So, because in Danny's life, a lot of different people have been involved, and so many different people are the steps to her success. Unwitting people, you know, I could tell you hours of stories about people that contributed to her 40 years and the person she has become. She's one of the best advocates ever for youth. It was a major relief when we discovered that we were not alone. Plenty of innovative people have faced not only the challenge of providing for their adult children who are becoming older adults, but also challenges for themselves relating to ageism and bias around mental illness. The first person that I found that could talk to me about Danny, I talked for 3 solid hours. I thought she was the only child ever in the world and universe that had been like her. And probably that everyone is unique, but you know, not that kind of uniqueness. So we go along a little bit and we learn that probably some of the information we need is there. We need to be able to listen to it. As my husband got sick, I'm going from one end of the spectrum to the other, from the younger experiences, which you may be having with your clients or your families, and then to the older spectrum, because from this part of my life, I used the strengths I learned that long ago. What I learned one time, a few years ago, few years ago, I'm going to a children's conference, and it was in Georgia, and we had great speakers and a great lineup, and adults were one place and children were another, but you had a screen that told you what was happening. And so my husband had gotten sick, and he was getting ill, and I didn't know what to do, becoming ill, physically and mentally, and I had no idea what to do. He was my mainstay, my, ride and die, and no longer could actually share things with him. And so I was going to this children's workshop, and I look up and there's this workshop about aging people and normal aging and normal supports for people. And so I went to that one instead of the children's one, which I'd probably written anyway. But I always went to the children's one. And I found information from 2 amazing people. I was connected with the Carter Center. And they did this presentation on aging and families with mental illness and all kind of configurations, as Sarah really, told us about. And that information kept me going, because in the years to follow, 4 or 5 years, my husband continued to get worse, very, very delusional. And so they helped me understand it was part of the process of aging that he had. It was not Alzheimer's. It was, I don't know exactly all the names for what it was, but a chance meeting perhaps saved me from being in a much worse place than I ended up in. So be open to the experiences around you. Talk to people, get to know people, build your networks, all kinds of things help and become supports for you, but you have to listen. I almost missed the piece that made a profound difference. I called up both the speakers. I got to know them personally really well. I've advocated for their families in some instances, and certainly they've given me an awful lot in return. And I want to come back to ageism and bias, but I'll just keep it in the order that I was thinking it when I wrote it. So my husband was very sick, and he was, he was immobile for years, and we kept him at home because that was his wish. And it took an awful lot of time and effort and everything. And so he died. And until the day he died, it was 24/7, 365 of intense helping. And immediately after he died, people were going things like, do you need me to carry your groceries? Do you need this? Do you need that? Do you want someone to stay with you? What happened 2 weeks ago? All of a sudden I'm old and there's a bias against me, but when I was doing every single thing for my husband, nobody felt that way. I aged overnight. And I don't know how or when it happened. But in the eyes of John Q. Public, immediately I was old. As long as I was doing everything constantly, you know, the Superwoman cape and all that stuff, nobody saw me as old. So I wonder about that when we talk about where we are now. At what exact time in life does someone decide you're old? And I would tell you, having lived through an awful lot of biases in my life, that this is by far the most challenging for me. I mean, it's like I walk into the gym and they want to help me up the stairs. Come on, I could outwalk you. I mean, so I find it interesting as I get to this age and my children still need the care that they needed when they were younger to a certain extent, but differently. I don't have to go into that because Sarah's the expert, and really, Sarah, you did a great job. You just made my mind go flying. But part of the challenge is not what we have to do for our children or even our extended family members. It's how you're treated, how I am treated. People in my family say my mind is sharper than it's ever been. That's probably true. But people don't treat you that way. Mm-hmm. I have white hair, but it doesn't look white, does it? Because the minute it gets white, I become older. It's so strange. So we can't have a conversation about ageism and bias and how to make plans for the rest of our family's lives, which in my case is largely now me doing it, while other people are judging us or questioning us. I find that to be the hardest. And I liked the idea that I came up with, if I can find it again. I really liked the idea of aging and peace of mind, a lifelong journey, because it is a lifelong journey. And I wouldn't be able to do as well today if I could not rely upon the connections, the people, the experiences, and my work. I choose to work. I choose to continue to work. I really need to be with my people, part of my village, my town, my community, my nation. I think in a sense, COVID has been a strong point for us. We've been able to go ahead in our organization, Georgia Parent Support Network, and we've been able to help other people. And that has been extremely, extremely good. What does the ever look like, and how do we get there? What happens when we are no longer here for them? That's the big one, isn't it? And there are no easy answers. And we deal with a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life at Georgia Parent Support Network. Some have lawyers, some have money, some have knowledge, but we're all just equal human beings. And each one of our decisions that we try to make to the best of our ability with what we have to work with is what our families are going to have to live with when we're gone. So, is there happy and forever? If there is, you need to find it here and now. I know how hard it is. I have been there. I can tell you horror stories beyond belief. I can also tell you joyful stories beyond belief. I have a great trust in human nature. I've seen more people step up and more people take care of each other than ever before in my whole life. And I'm always looking, because that was the example that my grandmother set for me. That is what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to help others. So it did bring out, I think COVID brought out the best in an awful lot of people. So of course the suffering was great and the tragedies were many. It's not to downplay those at all. It's to highlight at this time what everybody did for each other. So I'm doing exactly what this talks about. to the best of my ability, I'm preparing for the future for the people that I love and care for, my family and my extended village members, town members, nation members. I actually love all the people who supported us in all these years, and those who have trained us and given us information and helped us. But if I were leaving all of you, both providers and family members, with just a couple of things, what I actually would do would be to tell you to treasure peer supports. The first person I talked 3 hours without stopping, and I'm not a talker. Normally in my real life, I'm not a talker. That we should train people to be peer supports, lead them, direct them, mentor them, and care for them. It's a really tremendous job, and we're not all equally equipped to do it. We have a formulated plan, a gathering of information, all the information you can find, which started with the workshop I told you that I accidentally went to. I made it my business to know about aging and what was normal and what was not normal, and what you could expect, the variations of what you could expect, and how you could begin to plan for the people you love at all stages, wherever they were. My family rapidly built the foundation of our city, our state, our nation, after seeing where we fit in the patterns of what's available. We found strength and hope in peers long before there was such a thing as the peer movement. Georgia, in case nobody knows this, was one of the, I think we were actually the first state with peers a very long time ago. We had a man who had a vision, and he hired parents, and the first person to talk to anybody referred to his program was another parent that he personally had provided with information and resources, and knew that they were kind of grandmotherly type people. Don't tell them I said that. Who could go out and connect with the family, and not just somebody who hands a bunch of papers to you and tells you to fill them out and tries to figure out what you need. And it was amazing. I had never seen anything like it at that point in my life. This is now a long time ago that he did this, and it worked, and it grew from there. And then back to the COVID, I think we've discussed it. My mom loved poetry, and she used to wake me up every day with "Let's Be Up and Doing" with a heart training faith. Still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait every single morning. And so when I get tired, I kind of think of that. And I'm tired of COVID, and I'm tired that there's an African variation, and I'm tired. And I didn't do COVID well at all in the beginning. I set artificial dates for myself. You know, it was going to be here, it was going to be there, we were going to finish here. Oh, by the 4th of July, we could have all the family together. By Christmas, everything would be fine. My birthday was going to be big with everybody. And it wasn't. And then I had to give up, and it's not in my hands, and I should stop thinking about when it's going to be over, and rather make steps that could be useful to everybody, or try to make steps that could be useful to everybody. So have I told you how to take care of your aging people? No, I have no idea. I do know that you arm yourself with information, the first of those being hope. And you gain all the information of what's available, where you are, and what you can hope to do. I'm sorry I'm driving the person with the slides. Kind of distracting. Me to them. I think what you've heard, or will continue to hear, are the concerns of all of us. On my original board 32 years ago, I met 2 women that were planning for the forever for their children. Their children were young. They were in the low 20s, and they were planning forever for their children. And one of the ladies was older. I think she had adopted her son. She set up a group home, and she funded it with her insurance money, and where he lived until he died. And then it went on to help other people. And she lived down the road, and she took care of him, and that was her answer to her son. Not everybody can do that. The other one became a national spokesperson did an awful lot of things and was able to secure funds to ensure that her loved person would have an in the community placement. And she worked hard to get that information. That's the kind of thing that I like to see people do. Of course, with the consent and help and encouragement of the person who will be receiving the services the rest of their life. Right? We've been really fortunate. Other than Danny's mental health challenges and her physical health, both her cancer and her stroke before she's 50. She's a fighter, and she's managed to come through, and she can mostly take care of herself. We're busy now seeing how the stroke's going to go. But we have a family that pulls together, and that's a blessing. And when one of us gets tired, we try to recognize that. I want to talk a second about self-care, because I almost didn't do this one, ever. And so, nothing else matters if we don't get this one right. Find someone to talk to, and I mean an unedited version, someone who can listen to you and understand. What do you like to do? Okay, now go do it. I decided, because I like doing things, I always have. You know, I was a marksman, I ride horses, I did all these things. So I decided I was going to do them again. And so I have now, done parasailing, got back from Egypt in the last 2 months, sailed down the Nile. I made a list, flew in a helicopter over the Grand Canyon. I save and I do what I want to do, because if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. It can be little things. It can be a play, a music, a concert, but I save for it. It's not like I have the money to just go out and do it. What makes me happy? Do it, whatever it is for you. Do not wait for someday, somewhere, some way. And don't always put everybody else first. You've got to put yourself first. Is it a pedicure? Is it a massage? Is it a walk in a free park in Georgia? We have great, beautiful parks. Find something every day that you can do to make the world a better place. It doesn't take a lot of time or money. Just think about the possibilities. I was in a restaurant within the last 3 weeks, and somebody I never actually saw their face paid for my dinner. I didn't need them to pay for my dinner, but it surely did make me feel better. And in return, I paid for somebody else's dinner. Not that night, but somebody I chose. And the good feeling is amazing, not only when you get the benefit of that, but when you give it to someone else. And I made very sure that they had no idea who had given it to them. Every day before you open your eyes, count your blessings. This one works for me. I can be laying in bed thinking, oh my, oh my, oh my. And if I go, it's a beautiful day, I have a warm bed, the sun is shining, the rain is falling. There's so many great things to be thankful for in our lives. But I go back to the one thing to me that's most important. Find someone to talk to, and I mean unedited version, someone who can listen to you and understand. Without that, it's not too much for me. I mean, I have to have somebody I can call up with the unedited version. And I'm sure that you all do not want to hear the unedited version, but there's somebody out there who does want to hear you. You're not alone. The Chance workshop that saved my life. You know, I go back to that. If I had done what I always did and gone to the children's workshop, my life would have been different. And just with dealing with age and ageism and those kinds of things. So we're going to our workshops, I believe, and that's not me, but I did want to say that you're not alone, and we're all here for you. If you don't believe me, just ask around. And thank you all for listening to me and staying with us, and I hope that each and every one of you live here with some keys to helping plan your future and your future of your families and children. Thank you, everybody. Does somebody want to talk about the breakout groups?
Thank you so much, Sue. Thrilled to have listened to your talk. Very much appreciated. And Lachelle, I think you were going to talk about breakout groups. All as we're coming back into the room, we'll give folks just a minute to all make it back into the room.
We all managed to come back. This is exciting. Erin, as people are entering, our conversation went very, very well. I hope yours did too. We learned a lot in our breakout room.
That's wonderful. Well, Gail will invite you then actually to report out on your breakout room, and then I'm happy to share some of the pearls that came out in our discussion.
Oh, that would be great. And Sarah and Laura, please jump in because I don't have all the answers here or the highlights that I picked. But we had a very dynamic conversation, and Sarah, you were amazing and insightful, and so weren't all the participants, and I'm really enjoying today. So we really talked about, we spread the gamut from HIPAA and release of informations all the way to housing and to actually how we can support our own parents even who have mental illness. So some of the highlights were, something to remember is you may not be invited into the exam room with the physician or the psychiatrist, but you can always write something down. And when you have it documented, not just stated, but documented, you can send it to the doctor and let them have it. Once it's written down, it becomes part of the record. That I think is really, really important. And that way they can say, oh, I can't talk to you HIPAA, but you say, it's in written form, included in the record. I thought that was really important. How to make sure all the information is always updated. Make sure your loved one always has release of information that are updated. Usually they have to be renewed every year. A good way to help your loved one get information to the people who are serving him or her is to use a little bit of persuasion. And, you know, you can use rep payees, some informal ways to make sure the person you're giving care to helps include you in their formal care. How do you approach, oh, this was a good one. How do you approach the stigma of mental health? And I thought this was really insightful that Sarah said, and Sarah, jump in here. You said first, you have to approach the stigma within yourself. And that made me really think. That was really an important piece. Let's see. Pick a therapist that works with mental illness. We have a whole network. Make sure you have a network and natural supports. You can't do this alone, and your loved one can't do this alone. So make sure they're involved and incorporated in a network of supports and natural supports and resources. And I think both Sue and Sarah talked about that. Also, I have two more. One thing is when the first event, the first psychiatric event happens, you should start planning for the future then and really connect and figure out finances even for retirement and start thinking about what to do for the future, that you have to make, remember that finances have to go a long way. And that includes healthcare proxies, power of attorneys. You know, get your information in order early because we don't all stay young forever. And lastly, and I know this is what Sue and Sarah talked about, but Sarah talked about this right at the end, and I thought it was a perfect way to end. Put together a team as soon as possible. No one can do it alone, and no individual is alone if you put a team together. Sarah, Laura, do you have any other thoughts?
You did well, thank you.
Okay, Erin, it's your turn.
Laura, did you want to make a comment?
I think Gail pretty much covered everything. I did want to point out, Sarah brought up a really good point about, families are a living organism and thinking about the lifespan perspective as we age. So when mental health or substance abuse challenges arise, we want to think about what's familiar versus what is new. So yeah.
Great, wonderful, thank you. I had a hard time hearing that. I hope other people heard it. Thank you so much. We had some really interesting questions, and I think a couple of the key themes that came out as Sue ended her talk on self-care. And there were some questions about self-care and advocacy, and Sue's point I thought was so wise, that self-care is such a critical first step in feeling strong enough to advocate for yourself. So when you take care of yourself, when you are exercising and managing your stress and doing all those things, then you can feel strong enough to advocate for yourself and for the person that you're caring for, the people that you're caring for. And we talked about a couple of different self-care pieces in particular: exercise, as Sue talked about in her talk, and education. Knowing more makes life easier. And that came up too in some of the comments that were made around self-care, everything from sewing to church volunteering, and really recognizing that self-care piece is critical for assuring that you're going to be able to do all the things that a family caregiver would need to do. I also love, Sue, that you commented on providing random acts of kindness, and that was empowering to you to be able to feel like you had the power to do what you needed to do. And as you highlighted, not power over other people, just sort of that internal source of support or source of strength. What also came up in terms of managing the stresses and managing needs was about using your village and being open to believing that you'll get the support that you need if you ask, and knowing that if you don't ask, probably not going to get that kind of support. So really using that village, and Sue gave an example of having reached out to somebody who she didn't know and asked a question, and that person became such an incredible mentor. And I think that's a wonderful model for any of us to follow. If you've got a question, ask, and it's wonderful. And two, it doesn't necessarily all have to fall on the family. And Sue made a really wise comment about teaching your children to create their own support so that you don't have to be the sole support. And as you do that, also teaching them to ask the right questions, advocate for themselves, demand real answers. Some comments about being earlier about being talked over, or being, that healthcare providers sometimes don't even listen to folks with mental health issues. And Sue was really talking about teaching the kids, and adult kids as well, to be able to create their own supports, to speak up for themselves. And her final wisdom, which I think is critical, never give up. That this can be a tough challenge and a long challenge, sometimes a lifelong challenge. So never give up. And I feel like that's a fantastic place for us to rest as we, you'll see on the screen, evaluation and continuing education. Before I dive into making a couple of comments about that, Gail, did you want to make any additional comments here as we wrap? You are on mute, Gail.
My goodness, I try to pride myself not to do that, but I always do. I would love to defer to Sue and Sarah for any final comments or thoughts that we missed.
I don't think we missed anything. I think people heard a world of good things to help them. I loved all of the stuff that Sarah said, and it gave me just my thoughts are whirling still from her perspective of what we can do, because no matter where we stand in our children or our families' lives, we are teachers. Somebody's watching, somebody's listening, somebody's learning. So I really appreciated everything we heard and your questions and your conversations in the group. Thank you.
I would echo what Sue just said, that I think the amount of wisdom in the attendees here is remarkable based on the variety of experience. And I think that's often a point, is that in our individual communities, we may need to be a little more proactive than we have been in gathering sometime periodically the people who share this concern, to learn what else is happening and what other people know, and how to connect our clients or ourselves to the needs and to the services and resources that other people have. We just don't know what everybody does, and therefore we don't know what they know. And it'd be so prudent of us to form more gathering circles where we share this information.
Well, I just appreciate everybody being here. Sue and Sarah, I have learned more than I ever thought I would. I appreciate today a whole lot. Please visit both our websites, both at the E4 Center and NASTAC, and sign up for our newsletters and our information. And there's all kinds of resources on both websites. We would love to see you again. I'm getting a lot of thank yous and a lot of private texts saying that some people had to leave. They have a very special SAMHSA meeting, so that's why some people are excusing themselves early. But thank you so much for joining us today. And make sure you fill out that survey. Erin?
Absolutely. I will just echo gratitude for all of your collective wisdom in this space today, and invite you, whether or not you need continuing education, SAMHSA really wants to hear from you about how you felt about today's presentation. So the link is in the chat. We can put it in the chat a couple more times. You will also receive it via email in case you miss it today. You will get a link to this evaluation, which will then lead you to the continuing education. A reminder, it is a two-step process, the evaluation first and followed by the continuing education. You're also welcome to use your phone and click on the QR code on your screen. Again, you will get a PDF of the slides, a link to the recording on both websites, and link to the CE. So again, Sue, Sarah, thank you so much for your wisdom. All of you attending the webinar today, thank you all for your wisdom. And we'll just echo Sue's last comment about never give up. Take care of yourselves.
And have a good holiday season.
Absolutely. Thanks all.